So some quick questions here before we start. Who is using G1 today? 1, 2. That's it, right? Okay. Next question. Who knows which garbage collector they're using in their application? You don't count. Yeah. Okay, CMS? C4? Sorry, I had to mention C4 because unfortunately we have an Azul spy in the crowd. It's going to spy on us today and see how this is going. Okay, so not too many people. Actually, that's a better percentage than most places. We figure more than 70% of the people who deploy applications are clueless as to how the JVMs are actually configured in production, if they're configured at all. And you know, that's a bit. It's going to create a bit of an interesting situation because as we move forward to Java 9. Assuming that we can move forward to Java 9. That's another talk. You can cover that question, I think. When are you doing? When did you talk tomorrow? Okay, go see his talk tomorrow at 11. He'll convince you not to move to Java 9. It'll be fantastic. Okay, so yeah. So anyway, so as we move to Java 9, one of the things that's going to happen is battery. Is that, oh yeah, you can look at this stuff while I'm talking about the important things. As we move to Java 9, there's a whole bunch of things that's going to change. One of the things that's going to change is that we're going to move to the G1GC collector. And the G1GC collector is quite an interesting beast, as we're going to see as we get through the talk here. Anything else in here? Yeah, we do performance tuning. So actually, I've actually done a lot of garbage collection tuning, and the Azul guys will claim that they've solved the garbage collection problem, and in actuality they have, for the most part. But you know, but for those of us who are not wealthy enough to afford an Azul license to support our rich Russians' lifestyle here, then we'll be stuck with this thing here. And so the question is, you know, what impact might this have on your application's performance? And you know, as with the answer to any performance question, you're generally going to get, well, it depends, right? So let's take a look at some of the things that it depends upon. What do you guys? So, okay, let's see if we can flip through slides. So what I actually had done is I had done a whole bunch of performance testing with Cassandra with the G1. And so if we get through the boring stuff, then we can actually sort of get to the interesting stuff kind of quicker. Right, so that's the type of things we want to answer. So generational garbage collection, just a quick review. We end up with 4, maybe 5 spaces, depending on the implementation. And we have 2 different collection strategies. We're going to do what's known as a mark and sweep. Following the mark and sweep, we're going to do an evacuation, which is one type of collection. The other type of collection that we do is called an in-place collection. So we'll actually just not evacuate to another space, but we'll just retain the data in the space, and then we'll have to do things to manage that particular space. What we found is that the evacuating collectors work very, very, very well, The only problem is that we don't really, in the generational space, we don't have a what I would call is like an evacuating collector for tenured space, and so that's a real problem because that creates scalability issues. Really, what we find is that the scalability of a generational collector is tied to the size of the heap and also the size of the live set that you're retaining in heap. And if you're going to use Spark or any of these other wonderful technologies that say let's keep all of your data in heap, then of course that's bad news for the garbage collectors. Yeah, CMS is difficult to tune, so that's our mostly concurrent mark sweep collector that we have for doing an in-place collection inside tenured space, and it comes with a lot of bunch of really esoteric parameters for tuning, which you know, quite frankly, I haven't got a clue what they do. And I spend a lot of times with clients saying, like, I really don't know what this does. Doesn't look useful, so let's just get rid of it, right? So you clean off a lot of these flags off their command line, and surprisingly, CMS works better when you're done. So actually I'm actually doing in the middle of a couple of engagements like that now, where we're just going through and cleaning out flags and stuff like that, right? Anyways, so and the other thing is completely unpredictable. Well, maybe, but that's a different talk, because we actually have heuristics where we can predict what the garbage collector is going to do. But that's a little internal project that we had. So the G1 says, okay, well, evacuating collectors, we like them. So how do we make the tenured space, or the old generational space, the space where your data is going to eventually end up, also use this particular technology? And and so what they came up with, which is what's known as a regional garbage collection scheme, and that's designed to scale. And not only with this regional garbage collection scheme, not only is it designed to scale, it's designed to be predictable. So we can predict how long the pauses are going to be, or so they say. And easier to tune, sort of, but not really. The tuning is, it either works out of the box, or you basically go kill yourself, because that'll be less painful. Well, it's not quite that bad. But anyways, okay, so what are we going to do? So we're going to reserve a large contiguous space, as we do with the other collectors, and then we're going to fragment this space into regions. So here's a little calculation. So if I specify 10 gig heap, it's going to say, well, I want approximately 2,048 of these regions, so I get 5 meg heap, but that's not in my list of possible region sizes. So let's round that down to 4, divide it back in, which means I'm actually going to have 2,560 regions in my heap. So I'm going to put them all into a free list. And when I go to allocate something, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a region from the free list, and I'm going to tag it as being Eden, more than likely. Okay? And as objects or data ages, it'll go through survivor spaces, and it'll eventually end up in this tenured space, or old generational space, right? So the regions that are associated with each of these spaces will be tagged as data is copied into them. And so, you can get potentially end up with something that looks like this. And so unlike the other collectors, these spaces don't actually have to be contiguous. They can float around and do things. Okay, so let's say we have a 1 meg region, 1 megabyte, and we allocate a half gig array. How's that work? Because it doesn't fit now, right? We're going to have like a buffer overflow. Okay, that gets into this idea that we can have humongous regions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find a set of contiguous regions that are large enough to satisfy the allocation, string them all together, and I'm going to allocate into there, and I'm going to call that a humongous region. And they get special treatment because, they have special problems. The first problem is, obviously, what happens because of fragmentation. I don't actually have enough regions to satisfy the allocation. Excellent, right? What am I going to do then? Well, I'm going to have to run a collections sequence, and I'm going to have to hope that I evacuate enough regions in the right space that I actually end up with a space big enough that I can satisfy the allocation. And if I don't, then I need to run another one. And that'll have to be more aggressive. And if I still don't, then I'm probably going to have to run like a full GC. And that'll be, probably the most aggressive thing you can do. And if I still don't, then of course I throw the out of memory error and I kill the thread, right? And that allocation simply doesn't happen. And life goes on. Aha, you thought I said the JVM would exit, but it doesn't, right? You just kill that one thread. Unless you have a whole stack of threads that are wanting to do humongous allocations. Okay. So, how do we trigger a garbage collection in this condition? Well, at the start of the collection, the JVM is going to say, you get 20 regions for Eden. And so you allocate until you fill all 20 regions, and then, boom, you start a young generational collection. If we have a humongous allocation, that will trigger a collection. If the heap is full, that'll trigger a full collection. That should never happen with the G1, but it could. And in Java 8, we have this wonderful place called metaspace, where we keep metadata, of course, right? And if that reaches certain thresholds, then that will trigger a collection. So if we look at the garbage collection types, what we end up is I've color-coded them. Green means we run concurrently, and red means that they are stop the world, or full stop the world, right? So we have a young generational collection, which is a mark sweep evacuation. We have we also have what's known as an initial mark, but initial mark is piggybacked on the back of a young generational collection. And then we get into these concurrent phases here, and all of these concurrent phases actually run as part of a mark of tenured space. So we have a mark sweep evacuation of young, and we have a mark of tenured. There's no sweep, no evacuation. Well, at least not by a tenured space collector. The sweep and evacuation of tenured space is actually done by the young generational collector when they do what's known as a mixed collection. Okay? And there's a whole bunch of rules about how all of this works that we'll look at as we go forward. Right, so here we have reclaiming memory. We have mark sweep copy evacuating garbage collection. So we're going to capture all of the mutator threads at a safe point. That's a bunch of jargon that means we're going to stop your application from running. Right? Then we're going to complete this thing known as RSet Refinement. I'll talk about that in a second. We're going to scan for all the GC roots. Those are the things that we know to be live, or at least we think they're live. They may not be live, but we believe them to be live. And then from the GC roots, we're going to find, it's a visitor pattern, right? We're just going to go through and mark all of the live data. And as we mark it, we can evacuate it into other regions, right? To the two space, as they say. And then you do some cleanup, maintenance, and then you say, the application can run again. Okay, so we have this thing called RSet. Well, RSet is intertwined with this activity, which is called the scan for roots. So where are the roots for a particular region? Well, technically, these are known as external pointers. So that means that any pointer outside of the region that's pointing to some data inside the region is a GC root. Where are they? They're in the rest of heap. So one of the things we said at the beginning is we didn't want the garbage collection times to be linear with the size of heap, or to be correlated to the size of heap. So how do we actually break that? I mean, if I have to scan the rest of heap to find all the GC roots, then obviously, we're dead in the water right there. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create these things which are called remembered sets. And the maths behind remembered sets are complicated that I looked at the research paper behind it and said, yeah, I'm not going to read that. It's a very complicated, sparse representation of a directed graph, if that means anything to you. You can go and read about it if you want. But, but you can think of it this way. I have a region here, I have a region there, there's objects here, and they're pointing to objects into this region over here. So these things here are now GC roots. So rather than scanning these things to find the GC roots, what I'm going to do is record the pointer in this data structure. That's an expensive update. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to update the data structure. I'm going to queue the update. And I'm going to have a refinement thread come behind me and take that information and then basically put it into this data structure, right? So we end up with a refinement queue, and we end up with refinement threads that are running. And, how many refinement threads? Well, it depends on how many cores you have and configurations and everything like that. How many are running? Well, if we don't have much work to do, none. But as the queue fills up, we're going to get more and more aggressive, right, in terms of trying to process these RSets. So green is, we just have the some refinement threads working. By yellow, they're working really hard. By red, they're capturing your threads, your mutator threads, and they're actually getting your mutator threads to do their work, which means your application throughput is going to go do and dip when this starts happening, right? Okay. So that's good, because with this particular data structure, it means that I don't have to scan all of the heap to find my GC roots. I just need to go to the remembered sets. All right, but it's no free lunch, so there's a cost here. There's a time cost, because you have to use barriers, write barriers, in order to keep this thing consistent. And there's a space cost, because these things take heap. Okay. Predictability comes with these things known as collection sets. So when I do a garbage collection, what I want to do is I want to collect all of the young generational regions. And during a mixed collection, I'm going to collect some of the tenured space regions. Okay? So which ones? Well, the tenured space regions, I'm going to, when I mark them, I'm going to mark them for liveliness. So how much data is alive in a particular region? If the region is 0 live at the end of the collection, that's the easy case, it's the trivial case. I can take the region and I can place it back on the free list because it's empty. There's nothing there. Okay? If there's some data in it, it's cheap to collect. If there's a lot of data in it, it's expensive to collect. And I can get a prediction as to how much time it's going to take to collect, depending upon the fullness. So what I can do is I can fill out the C set until I, with these regions, the cheap ones first, until I finally get to a condition where, where I'm predicting that I'm going to hit this threshold, which is called the max GC pause time, right? Pause milliseconds, right? Default value for this is like 200 milliseconds, right? So I'm going to try to keep all of the collections under 200 milliseconds. So if I look at the heap after mark sweep, you can see that all of the all of the Eden regions have been basically merged in this thing called a survivor. And as I keep going on, eventually the data in the survivor will end up in the tenured space regions, right? So if we look at the parallel phases, so if we look at the collection itself, there's a number of parallel and serial phases. These are the parallel phases. I'm going to show you these in charts and data, so I'd rather look at them there than here. And there's a whole bunch of serial phases. So these are sort of lining up with the things that I said that the collector was doing. And starting a concurrent cycle. So, when do we start dealing with all of these old regions? The concurrent mark. Well, we're going to say when the IHOP, which is known as the initiating heap occupancy percentage, reaches 45%. So when we hit that threshold, then we're going to say, okay, let's kick off an initial mark, and we'll kick off a concurrent mark of tenured space at that point in time. Right, so that's basically how the whole thing works. So, a few little bits and points here. So, flags you probably want to use or should be using. So this is how you're going to turn it on. You're going to set a max heap size, and you're going to set a pause time goal. And I always like to turn on GC logging, so that's close to my minimal set of GC log settings that I'd like to turn on. And that, well, we'll see the use of that in a few minutes. Flags you might want to use. So you might want to specify a heap region size. Now, the technical definition of a humongous allocation is an allocation that exceeds half the size of a region. So I just had one customer. What we did was they were allocating very large objects, and I said, okay, if you want to move to G1, probably you don't want to allocate these large arrays, so let's just fragment them right now. So they have a fragmented data structure, and we can set the region size such that that fragment size will not be considered to be a humongous allocation. Okay, so we've done a few things like that, and that's really helped with their throughput. Well, actually, what's helped was with their pause time picture. That's why we're beating you now. Okay, so and you can see there's initiating heap occupancy fraction. There might be some reason to play with that. If you unlock experimental VM options, you can actually have the new size. By default, the new size will try to be as small as it possibly can, but it won't go below this threshold. If you need it to be smaller than that, or you don't want it to get that small for some reason, then this is experimental option. You can actually go in and try and change that. So we're doing some video work with a submarine that had words on it like friendly torpedo, although I don't know what a friendly torpedo actually looks like. I calculated that the heap needed to be 40 gigs, but sorry, Eden needed to be 40 gigabytes or megabytes. Blah. Eden needed to be 40 megabytes, but we had a 10 gig heap, so we had a problem. So I went in and adjusted this so I could get it small enough. That way we could meet our 16.7 millisecond time budget for doing the video processing on everything. Okay, and we can, get a little bit of more information about what's going on here. Flags, you should think twice about looking. So what we're going to do is, after we do a concurrent mark, we're going to take all of the eligible regions to be swept. We're going to put them in a set. And then I'm going to divide that set up into a maximum of 8 different chunks. So if I can clear all of them within my time budget within a single mixed collection, we're done. If I can't clear them within 8 mixed collections within the time budget, well, you lose. The time budget loses in this case, right? The good time budget is a goal. It's not a guarantee in this case. So there's some reasoning I can think of right now that where we might want to be more aggressive in collecting tenured space, which means we might want to come back and adjust this. I'm going to do those experiments with a client next week on a live production system, which is quite fun because the customer is very nice in letting me doing all of these wonderful, unproven experiments on live production systems. Yes. I told them I would actually even pay them to do this work. It's so sadistic. Okay. Oh, right. So here's the threshold percentage, right? These are liveliness percentages. 85 and 65 depending upon the version of the JVM you're using, which means that if I'm above these values, or one of these values, depending upon the version of the JVM you're using, what we're saying is that don't bother dealing with that region for a tenured space region, right? So we're also going to play with these values too. And there's a bunch of flags that you probably should never use. Anyways, you can see what they are as they're going to have various interesting effects. So things that give everybody grief: RSet refinement. If you have a lot of mutation in your application, you're probably going to build up large RSet refinement queues. And if you call for a collection and the RSet refinement hasn't been completed, then the garbage collection threads are going to have to finish the job. Right? That adds to the pause. Object copy. Well, I say not much to say here, but I lie, and I'll try to correct the lie as we look at some of the GC logs. But that's probably the number one problem. And there's another problem that goes with this, and it's known as floating garbage. And I don't have a slide on floating garbage here, but I probably should have. Floating, remember what I said, like we're going to find the external pointers, and we're assuming that the external pointers are all live? Well, as it turns out, when you have multi-space collections going on, if I don't collect that region, then I don't really know if that pointer is live or not anymore. And if it's not live, and I treat it as live, that means that everything that it's pointing to is actually dead, but it's live. We call them zombies, right? And they eat memory. Or is that brains? And it's memory. So the point is that these live things hang around. And since the cost of the evacuation is linear to the number of live objects that you have, these artificially live objects add to the copy costs. And that's known as floating garbage. It's dead, but it's alive. We'll figure out it's dead, but only when we collect that region. And that can have cascading effects. So it's quite an interesting problem. Yes, you guys suffer from it too, don't worry. Okay. Humongous allocations. I think I explained that before. You have a heap fragmentation issue. And, it's like, anybody do the Windows defrag? Well, it's the exact same problem, right? Oh, sorry, I did put floating garbage in here. I think I wrote that in while I was sleeping. Sorry. Okay, let's get to the fun part. So we have a Cassandra benchmark, and basically what I did was I just tuned it using G1. So my baseline is how well did the Cassandra guys do tuning it with CMS? And our goal here is like to use some more jargon that no one will understand, is to maximize MMU, which is known as a minimum mutator utilization. In other words, we want to give the application as much time and not have the garbage collection threads take away from the amount of time that the application threads have. So so in this case, this benchmark is give it a fixed unit of work, which should ideally be cleared in about 15 minutes. And I set the work up so that it was going to burn 100% CPU. And I did that intentionally. Because at 100% CPU, I have a zero-sum gain. If the garbage collection threads are running, that means I'm not clearing workload, right? Even in the concurrent phases. So this is a good measure of overhead as to what the collector is going to do. It is not the proper way to run this garbage collector, so the benchmark is completely unfair from that perspective. But it does give a good indication of what the overhead picture looks like. And so here's some graphs, right? Can't have this type of talk without graphs. And you can see over here, that's my CMS. And higher in this case is better. Right? And you can and I said, okay, well, you know, I ran the G1 first over here. These are all the G1 charts. And I said, I'm clever, I'm smart, I can outsmart these guys. I will start tuning this thing. And you can see every single thing that I tried, with the exception of something in here, well, even that's not as good, right? Basically, I could never get anything that performed as well as the performances I could get with the CMS collector, with this benchmark under these conditions. Okay? If you look at the inverse problem, you can see, you know, again, that's CMS, that's the G1. And this is just the run times, right? How long did it take to clear that particular workload? So that was a real problem. So let me just get, oh, not the proper ones, but I'll just wear these ones anyways. Maybe I should go for the other ones. Okay, so obviously if I'm doing a lot of garbage collection stuff, we're, oh, perfect. Here we go. Oh. Not perfect. Let's go here. Can everybody see that? Because what I can do, since we're in VGA, or whatever, is, oh gosh, okay. Let me just bring that over here. So, so if you're doing garbage collection analysis, then obviously we need some tooling to do the garbage collection analysis with. So a number of years ago, I started writing Sensum, and actually we have a tooling company now then London, and this is part of the products we sell are pushing, and enough of the sales pitch, right? So essentially what we're going to do is consume the GC log, and I'm going to try to get an idea of what's going on here. First, you can see the log duration, so that's how long it ran. And you can see this is a CMS collection. Here, let's see if I can make that bigger so we can see what's going on. So what's going on here? So we have total pause time of 54 point whatever seconds. So that's of the 14 minutes we were paused for almost 55 seconds. Application throughput here in this case is like 93.6%, which is low. I'd certainly like to see it above 95%. But this is CMS, and you can get an idea of like how many. We had 762 par new collections and 27 CMS cycles. So if I just go down, hopefully I can do this without having to flip the screen around. Nope, sorry. Let's just do that. Whoop. I hate when that happens. I should have been able to. There, you can see what's going on in terms of heap usage, right? So we have a max heap of 4 gigs. The green bits are the remarks of the CMS cycle. But you can see, but basically what we have is a live set here of like 2 gigs. Yeah? So if you follow the bottom of this line here, and it's really stable and it's running really, really, really nicely. And if you look at our pause time picture here, you can see the pause time picture is whoops. What happened? Operator You can see the pause time pictures, mostly running less than 100 milliseconds. So it's okay. It's a bit busy, but it's generally not so bad, right? So this is basically what we have to beat in terms of to try to make things better. And let's just go over to this one here. Hopefully it's the right one. Yes. Okay. So this is just straight configuration. So we run the benchmark again. We're basically just saying, okay, let's use the same amount of RAM, 4 gigs, and let's see what happens here. And you can see that all of a sudden we're suffering from more pause time. And you can see, we're 864 collections now. So there's a lot more collection activity here, and actually the collections are probably, if we go to the pause time, first let's take a look at the heap after GC. You can see that pretty much looks the same, which is something you'd expect. Actually, it seems to be using less memory for reasons I can explain later. You can see, and it's actually not even using as much heap. It only decided to go up to 3.6 gigs of the 4 gigs. So that's actually a problem in this particular case. If we get into the pause time picture, then you can see all of a sudden, the pause time picture here, that looks worse, doesn't it? Where everything was actually, sorry, no, it looks a lot better and everything. It's just that it's happening a lot more frequently. It's that's 200 milliseconds, 100 milliseconds. No, sorry, it does look worse. I was right in the first place. But okay, so so you can ask the question like, okay, what's going on? And why are the pause times looking like this? Here's their phases, right? And you can see there's a parallel phase. So all the blue dots up here are really the parallel phase. There's our other phases, which are the combinations of serial phases. But if we look at it as a percentage, okay, now it becomes really obvious, right? The parallel phase is really a problem. Okay, so what's happening in the parallel phase? Well, we have external root scanning, object copy is all up here. We have RSet refinement happening down here. That seems to be the next layer of things. If you look at this as a percentage, then it really, really becomes clear that object copy is a problem in this particular application, right? So if we want to reduce pause times, we have to deal with the object copy problem. But I already said that there's no way to deal with the object copy problem. Sort of. That brings us back to a bit of theory. Back to slides. Okay, we have this thing here. This thing is known as the weak generational hypothesis. What the weak generational hypothesis says is that the longer data lives, the more likely it is to live longer, right? But most of the data is going to die very young. As a matter of fact, most of the data will not be live by the time it leaves the CPU. It dies in the CPU, okay? This was the basis for making generational garbage collectors. This is the basis for having the regional collector look like a generational garbage collector, is because I can put all of that stuff into a nursery and put all of the other stuff into a tenured space, and I can do frequent collections of the nursery, right? And since most of it is dead, then the copy costs are going to be very low because I'm not copying that much stuff out of there, right? But it also has another interesting side effect. This is a measure of the data in an application over time, or a typical Java application over time, which basically says the amount of live data in the nursery at any point in time is constant. And I'm like, okay, as soon as I made that realization, I'm going like, whoa, okay, that's cool. I know it's geeky cool, but it's still really cool, right? And so, what is it saying? It's basically saying is that if I want to reduce object copy costs, don't copy as often. Right? The obvious conclusion. Okay, perfect. So how am I going to not copy as often? Well, I need to make the nursery bigger, Eden bigger, and I need to make sure that it doesn't shrink. So when we start doing tricks like that, all of a sudden we find that we have reduced the copy costs. I mean, it's still a problem, but it's not quite as big a problem. So we go over to the third one. Where is the third one? Over here. You have all this. Oh, yeah, it's up over here too. Okay, you can see. Yeah, 3, right? We're still sort of at 99.3% throughput and everything like that. But you know, we actually have a bit of less pause time. It's still not as good as CMS and everything like that. And certainly the copy costs are certainly really, really high. But if you look at the overall pause time picture, you can see that we have done a little bit in terms of reducing the copy costs, right? And so if I keep doing more work in this direction, I think I can probably reduce the copy costs even more. There's a floating garbage problem in there. I have another chart that can show that show that bit also. But the floating garbage problem, we can fix that also with some other tricks and stuff like that. So that's essentially what I'm going to experiment with next week in the live production system, is to try to figure out how do we get rid of the floating garbage. We get rid of the floating garbage, a lot of the object copy costs are going to go down, right? And we can do these other tricks to reduce the object copy costs, and all of a sudden we can actually get some reasonable performance out of this collector by tuning it in this direction. Okay, so yes, I know it's a lot of information to pack in 45 minutes, and I think we're just about done. I can probably take 1 or 2 questions?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So, sorry, that's my advertisement. So you had to listen to me, and then I have to throw advertising on you because I do run a performance tuning workshop. And we do run it in Greece, in a particularly nice place, as I think the guys in the front can attest to. But anyways, any questions?
Since there's a good minimal set for when you're logging, do you think it would be a good idea to have just one argument, just turn all those things on?
Logging?
Yeah.
The logging?
Yes.
Oh, one argument to turn all those sets on. Yeah, all of the logging is going to change in JDK9, and so you will actually be able to do that in a very disruptive way.
Okay.
Right. I mean, okay, so just to let you know, like Peter here is giving the next talk, and he's probably got one of the best journaling logging frameworks on the planet. He's sitting right here. So I'll plug that. And the point is that when they implemented JDK logging, the guy they should have listened to, sitting in the front here, they didn't, and they did everything exactly opposite of what he would have recommended. So yeah, so that'll be fun. Right now, GC logging is not a performance issue, but I imagine GC logging with the other logging that's being turned on in JDK9 will be an issue. But be that as it may. Yes, it'd be nice to have a bundle, but unfortunately that's not the way it works right now. Any other questions? Right. That means no one understood a thing I said. That's really bad. Sorry about that.
Hey, Kirk.
Yeah, oh, yeah. Sorry, mercy question. Thank you.
If you have an application that's doing a lot of immutable objects that are short-lived, right?
Yeah.
Is expanding new-gen a good idea? Your Eden spaces. Because I haven't done that historically because I've been worried about
actually, the way you tune these things is you tune the individual pool sizes. Max heap size is a sum of the individual sizes. So the first thing you want to do is with Eden is you want to control frequency. And frequency is basically allocation rate times, size, or divide by, and you get the idea. But the point is that if you want to control the frequency, then you need to really sit there and tune Eden, right? Right? And when you got that thing settled, then you can sort out the rest. So if you're creating a lot of data, then it makes sense to, first off, stop doing that. That's the better thing to do. But the second thing to do is then just to try to control the frequency.
But if I do, tune the the Eden sizes, right?
Right.
That has an effect then on the size of the other boxes.
No. If you specify Eden, you'll just specify Eden. So I just specify everybody individually.
Right, but then the other ones become smaller as a result of the max size of the...
Well, no. It's like I said, max size is the sum of everything else, what it needs to be.
Okay, so it won't... It'll extend the max size beyond what
It might. It depends on what the other sizes need to be. I often find that the default settings in the JVM are completely inadequate for most applications. Eden is way too small. Survivors are way too small. And tenure tends to be too big. Quite often my Eden and survivor spaces will be maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 times larger than tenured.
Yeah, but Eden would have stopped the world, wouldn't it?
What's that?
If you made the Eden larger in a CMS collector, then it would stop the world, wasn't it?
Yeah, of course. But the cost is copy costs, and our weak generational hypothesis looked after that. No. Weak generational hypothesis, I'm copying the same amount, right? Because the amount of live is constant for some definition of constant. Okay? At any point in time, yeah. Okay, good. I think we're done. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Enjoy your day. Bye.